All right, time for another edition of the Industry 45 podcast show. I'm your host, Shane Christopher Neal. GiantTV.ca is the website. Also, you can check out the Industry 45 show at GiantFM.com, Country89.com, Giant TV Niagara on YouTube, and now it's available at MusicLifeMagazine.net as well. So today's episode is a special episode, I think, because I've always been a big fan of the band The Spoons, and this year marks 40 years. Am I even 40? I think I am. 40 years of The Spoons, and I recall back in the 80s and 90s, they were all over Much Music, and I tell you, the video era in the 80s and 90s was so impactful for Canadian bands like The Spoons, and I'm going to speak to Gord Deppe today, one of the founding members, about that and so many things that have happened over the 40 years. They formed in Burlington, Ontario, and their first album came out in 1981 called Figure Neighbourhood. It was very popular on Canadian University radio. The real breakthrough album, though, came after that with Arias and Symphonies. It spawned 3 top 40 hits here in Canada: Nova Heart, Arias and Symphonies, and Smiling in Water. They toured with bands like the Culture Club, Simple Minds, The Police, and Nile Rodgers. He got his hands on The Spoons back in 1983 with the album Talkback. It included the hit Old Emotions, but it was not issued outside of Canada, which was crazy. A serious disappointment for the band, especially when you think about it, using Nile Rodgers, who was basically had international stature. Like, this guy was producing Duran Duran, okay? And songs like Tell No Lies, Romantic Traffic, such great songs produced by Nile Rodgers. They had their ups and downs, through the 90s and the 2000s. And they had a brand new album come out in 2019 called New Day, New World. And today we talked to Gord Deppe about 40 years with The Spoons. Stick around, that's next. Industry 45 podcast show for Giant TV.
You're listening to the Industry 45 podcast show with Shane Christopher Neal on Giant TV.
All right, it's always a privilege to talk to this gentleman, Mr. Gord Deppe. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, we've done this a couple times.
It's all right.
Here's my question. Obviously, the Spoons 40th in 2020, and that in itself is awesome. Although it makes me feel like I'm old because I grew up watching the Spoons in high school and college. That's another story. But did the 40 years look like you thought they would now that they're here?
No. Well, first of all, I never thought in a million years we'd be doing it this long. When you're a young musician, you think, well, when I'm 30, people are like, they're done, right? They're has-beens. And that keeps, all the 30s came, 40s, 50s, now I'm 60. and you know what? We're not the only ones. I do these Lost 80s tours with the Flock, and every 80s band you can think of is out there. And everybody's sounding great, and it's aging well for the 80s.
So let's go back to the beginning in 1980 and early on. So you're from Burlington, which isn't far from here, and you came out with your first album in 1981, yeah. Figure Neighbourhood, which was a great name, by the way. And so you do this album, and what's in your mind at the time? Take me back to that time. Was it just, hey, we're going to make one album, see how we make out, see if people like us? What do you recall about 1981?
Yeah, that was pretty well about it, because the music on that first album, there's not much on there you could really play on the radio. It was totally self-indulgent, weird. Sandy and I just come out of being in a prog rock band, so we didn't care about airplay. We were snobs, And I'm surprised our record company let us get away with just doing whatever we wanted to. It wasn't until the next record, when we got signed to A&M out of Los Angeles, they said, hey, you guys are kind of cool, but can you write something you play on the radio? So, yeah, we were kind of like defiant kids, wanted to leave our mark on the world, but not really care about success. I don't think we in a million years dreamed that it would go where it would eventually lead us.
So who came up with this sound? Because it's new wave, synth pop. I love how your Wikipedia says post-progressive, which is...
Post-progressive. Yes. Well, it is, because it came out, yeah, that was where we came from. The band right before the Spoons, called Trist, was a self-indulgent band with Mellotron and acoustic guitar and flute. We love bands like Genesis and King Crimson and stuff, that kind of thing. So that's probably where they. And if you listen to stuff like Red Light off the first album off Stick Figure, it still has remnants of that progressive. It's got the Taurus bass pedals like Genesis used and Rush used them too, and elements that were left over from that time. And I can pick out little things and even Spoon singles that come from prog rock.
Really, eh? No,
yeah.
were you determined, though, that you were going to do something? Because New Wave was new, right? And
yeah.
Duran Duran coming out and Simple Minds. And you mentioned, I heard in an interview, which I thought was great, about seeing OMD, correct?
Yeah.
At the Brass Rail, which either is or was a strip club in Hamilton. Did that define? Did that kind of you listened to that and said, "This is kind of what we want to sound like"? Where did you get your sound from? Because it was
exactly.
so new.
But yeah, you're right. It's kind of two things. It's one thing is when I saw those guys play, they kind of were not only made me want to go. Hey, we should be like that because I want to be less quirky like the Stick Figure Neighborhood record. It was more like Talking Heads and Nina Hagen, sort of very quirky, and I hardly sang. It was sort of very staccato and weird. But then I'm thinking, I want to be more like these British bands like OMD and Ultravox. They were more sort of grand and classical. But then on the other hand, that's where we came from. It was almost like saying, hey, you don't have to abandon your prog rock roots.
Right.
You can still have some of those elements of the dark, moody chords and cool guitar textures and still be you. And I thought, well, geez, we were kind of that anyway. And we sort of made Stick Figure as our sort of trying to figure out what our place in New Wave was, because New Wave was so many things. It's not just hair bands or just electronics and drum machines. I mean, Rush was around in the 80s. I mean,
right.
AC/DC was around. R&B was, disco, so many different styles. So it was just sort of finding our way, maybe trying too hard to be strange and weird, I think. By the next record, we kind of embraced our roots a little bit, our progressive roots, and said, hey, what the heck, it's going to work. It's not going to be alien, because New Wave was open to anything.
And New Wave really, to me, back in the day, was like, well, there's going to be a drum machine probably. And that was new then. Is it something you consciously looked and said, this is kind of what we want to define our sound? If that's what it did or not, I don't know. But because back then it was so new and you guys embraced it.
No, it was. And we have to give John Punter, our producer, credit for that. I mean, because the hand clap drum machine thing that's on Nova Heart, that was such a big part of that, and really a hook of that song, was one of the very first uses of that, in the very famous 808 drum machine, which is now still prevalent in dance music. Even you still hear it,
Right, yeah.
But at the time, it was a brand new box. But John Punter, our producer, was also a drummer, so he understood those sounds. He worked with Roxy Music in Japan, and people he even used drum machine. I just recently saw with Slade, the song
Nice,
Runaway.
yeah.
It's got drum machines mixed in, but he was really into rhythms and stuff. So he got us into that, but it wasn't. It's funny, on Stick Figure Neighborhood, which was our first 80s album, there was no drum machine at all, which is weird, in kind of a way. It wasn't until John reintroduced it to us, and it really defined kind of our sound for a while. But it wasn't just drum machines. We had a cool combination that we learned from OMD, and that was combining real drums with the drum machine, especially live. It's a really cool combo.
Absolutely. And so let's go to the next album with Arias and Symphonies, because that to me, and I don't know if you'll agree, that to me was the best Spoons album. Now, I don't own all your albums, but back in the day when that came out, I was so addicted to the song Arias and Symphonies, which I think I told you sang wrong, if you recall, at a show in Toronto when you said Arias. Do you remember this conversation we had in St. Catharines? I had mentioned this.
Oh, is it Arias or Arias?
Yeah, whatever. But and of course, Nova Heart. So is that album still the best album the Spoons have ever put out? And it was really defining to your career for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the best. I think a lot of people say that for its time. I think absolutely, but and I have to admit, there's some records we made in between that I wasn't 100% happy with, but still went on to be successful. And then other people argue stuff like the stuff we did with Nile Rodgers, Tunnelized Romantic Traffic, put us more on the map because they were more mainstream. But as a serious work, I mean, that album is really one to be proud of. But I also have to say, and I know every musician says this because that's the way they are, but I'm self-critical enough to know the difference. But I think our new record, New Day, New World, is is right up there with Arias. Those are my two favorite records right now.
Well, that's because you're
and
60.
Maybe because it has elements of it. It's kind of like Arias. It has the grand opening. It has sort of dark songs. It has a bit of the poppy stuff from like Dramatic Traffic. It has some of the rockier stuff like it did when we were with Anthem. So it has a sort of a bit of everything. But I would say those two records are my favorites.
I was going to say it's because you're 60 and now you're going, you know what? This is just who I am, and you're going to love it.
But once again, I'm not one of those guys who loves everything they do. You know, we've done other stuff, and I can be honest with you and say, I'm not so keen to that one, and not so proud of that one. But Arias, obviously, and then this new one. And we did an album 7 years ago as well, and I thought that was really good too, but not as good as this one.
You mentioned Nile Rodgers. So Duran Duran, David Bowie, like Mick Jagger, Madonna. I mean, the guy's a legend. So I want to talk about Talkback for a minute, because he does that album, and it includes Old Emotions, right? And but the thing is, it was not issued outside of Canada. And so for you, who brings on an international name like Nile Rodgers, take me back to that time when you're kind of thinking to yourself, we've got a great record, we've got great singles, we've got now play on Much Music, which we'll talk about, because that was huge for anybody coming from this country, music, television, and yet, you know, it is not issued outside of the country. That's crazy.
Oh, it was a horrible time for us, and it was, especially when everything was going so right, because it was actually A&M who kind of set up the whole thing with Nile, and Nile came to see us in New York City opening for Culture Club, and I know I told you this story before, but one of the greatest compliments we ever got in the 80s was from him then, and he came out to see us, and he told a story a couple of years ago, and he was up here with Chic opening for Duran Duran, and I actually got on stage with him, and he, after the show, he was telling people backstage how we met, and he said, I went to see Culture Club with Sting, the two of them were in the crowd.
Wow.
And Sting had helped us get signed to A&M, so he came backstage, brought back Nile. I don't know who he was. Meanwhile, he's one of the biggest producers in the world, right? So he comes in and he wants to work on our next record. I'm thinking, who's this guy? I want to work with John Punter. I want to work with more of the British guys. But the story he told a couple of years ago, and this is so cool. He said, I went to see Culture Club, and they were okay. And then when the Spoons came out, and this is what Nile Rodgers, like probably the biggest producer in the world now, after he's inducted in the Rock and Roll of Fame or something. He said the Spoons came out, and they were the shit.
Wow, that's not.
That's like what you're saying that, and we're still the only Canadian band he's ever produced. And he said we did 2 records together. But you're right, we had the big producer, we had A&M Records behind us, we all the success in Canada with our releases, and all of a sudden, they got a new A&R guy at A&M Los Angeles. And he cleared house. Like, it wasn't just us, but all the old stuff. He had a new vision for the label, and he said, let's get rid of everything, start fresh. And not only couldn't we, weren't they going to release it, it was their property, and they wouldn't let us have it back.
That's
so we
crazy.
couldn't even take it and have somebody else release it.
Right.
So two of our biggest songs, especially like Tell No Lies, Dramatic Traffic, which were big hits here, never got released on there. And it was so sad because there was even a best of Nile Rodgers CD that I saw, and it had Bowie on it, and Madonna, and Donna Summers, and whatever, all the things he worked on. And it didn't have Dramatic Traffic or Tell No Lies. It actually had the rhythm on it, which was on the first record he did with us before the whole, debacle happened at A&M Records. so it was sort of a secondary track that he was allowed to put on there.
Oh, I get it now. Yeah, okay. So he produced. He produced Romantic Traffic, right? And tell me specifically about that song, because to me, and I've said this to you before, that I'd come home from school, put on Much Music, and they played the shit out of that video. Which is
I think that was on the very first episode of Much Music.
I think so too.
It goes back that far.
And that was an interesting video, and I think what was more interesting is that you and Sandy broke up before that video. and
like I say, you can almost see it. You can almost see, if you watch that knowing we just broke up, you can see it in our faces. Like, we don't look at each other. We're always in different scenes. We're both kind of like distant looking and sad, but it really works, for that song. And because there was no script, we were just ourselves. And whenever they show Rob, Rob's trying to be sort of neutral, and then Derek's just trying to be a ham. It's almost like reacting to the situation, knowing that this band could break up at any minute. So he's hamming up like a clown, like trying to just bring some levity to the thing.
Sure. So talk about the do's in the song, because Sandy had told me this story before about how you couldn't come up with lyrics. And
I was trying to, and luckily Nile Rodgers stopped me, and that was probably one of the most brilliant things he did. He said, "Stop. The dudes are good. They're a hook." I said,
and
"Really?
they are
That's good enough?" Yeah. Imagine if I had put words there, I would have ruined it.
See, you knew what you were doing. So we talked about some good things, some things that came up on my radar. I bought the album, Bridges Over Borders. I thought it was a decent album, but if you read anything, it will tell you it was kind of commercially, at least, not a good album.
Yeah.
It did not chart in the Canadian Top 100. Why did you feel? What did you feel like when you were making that album? Did you feel like it was a good album at the time, and were you surprised it didn't make the Canadian charts, or was it just, you know what, at 1986 you were kind of going, you know what, maybe this is just the end of where we're at?
Not quite. I mean, I thought it was a good record. We were a little torn, and at that point we were now signed with Anthem Records, which is Rush's label, and Rush's manager, Ray Daniels, and they wanted to make us American market. Cause I think maybe he was trying, because he probably saw what happened with A&M and how we got completely derailed there because of what happened. And he thought, okay, let's really go for America, because that's where we wanted to make it. And it was a good effort, because it actually sold better than in America than here. And we did big American tours with Human League and Survivor, like arena tours and stuff. And all of a sudden, we were a different band, really. We had a second guitar player, Colin Cripps, who now plays with Blue Rodeo on guitar, and it was more guitar and drum heavy, and it was fun. I mean, as a guitar player, I thought, oh, this is fine. In retrospect, we definitely were going down a different path,
right?
But it was an experiment, and some of the songs we still do live. I mean, there were some good songs in there that still fit well into the set, but it's not really a time that I was super happy with, because I wanted to be that British-sounding, semi-progressive rock band that we started off with, right?
Right.
I wanted to be more like Ultravox or Simple Minds or that kind of thing. I don't want to be like, the American hair bands.
So we're going to skip ahead a bit because we don't have so much time here, but let's go to 2019. So New Day, New World. And talk about that album, because off the top you mentioned how you're really proud of this album, probably one of the best ones you've done. Speak to the album and why you think that.
I think one thing. I mean, I talk to people about songwriting, and when we were in the '80s, it was a routine thing to make albums. You pretty well record and make videos and all that stuff and write for a year, and then you tour for a year, and then you come back and do another album, and you tour. It becomes like you're always writing in between as well. So it's almost like being a staff writer for a company or something, right? So whereas now we put a record out when we think it's right. First of all, there has to be demand for it, but also we have to feel like we have something different, a different body of work to put out there, right? So I think there's like 7 years since the last record, but you know what? It gives you time to live life, and I've in a whole different chapter of my life right now,
right.
like mentally and personally in my life and everything, and so much more different perspective to write about, and that really comes across. And I think we make albums one after the other, they kind of just sort of flow into each other without much change or gradual change. And so I think it's got a lot going on it that way. And it's having a lot of fun, too. I want to get back to the sort of happy summertime vibe of Romantic Traffic, Hollow Eyes. But we also, like I said, have elements of the Arias, sort of the grand stuff, like the opening of this record and some of the songs in there. I won't go through titles. I won't mean anything to anybody, but it's just, to me, it's like 10 or whatever, 11 really good written songs that I probably might not have, I wish this album had come out in the middle of the late 80s when things were kind of slipping away from us.
Yeah.
I wish we had made this in 86 instead of Bridges Over Borders, or, I think it would have been the perfect album for that time, but maybe it wouldn't be right, because it isn't like really an 80s album. It has sort of 80s flavors in it. But I don't know. I think it's just maturing and seeing life through different eyes, and I don't know, and having fun again.
Well, speaking
like
of,
my life is a totally different place now than it was
right,
5-6 years
exactly.
ago.
And let's talk about that real briefly. So A Flock of Seagulls. So how did that come about? Because, I mean, I wasn't following a whole lot, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, Gord's in A Flock of Seagulls. I was like, what? And this happened?
Some people
what?
don't get it. I thought everybody knew about it. Like, we just did a slew of gigs out west, Calgary and Vancouver, all the casinos and stuff, and we had a great package. It was spoons, men without hats, and Flock of Seagulls. And I thought everybody knew. And I walk out on stage, and there were like people yelling stuff like, "Good, we still love you." Like one guy said, "Traitor."
So how long have you done that now?
I've almost 3 years. I'm coming up 3 years, and it's funny, even at their level, who you just assume is always doing well. They said that they've never played this much since like the '80s. So, I can see it with the spoons, but even at that level, so we do all the big '80s tours and cruises. We just had 2 cruises canceled, obviously.
Yeah, that sucks.
Cruises. But we've been to Europe and Mexico. We're supposed to go to Philippines, and yeah, it's great. To me, it was a natural fit. We first played together in '82, opening for the Police at the Police Picnic in Toronto, and we were 2 young bands. I remember really being impressed by those guys, like especially the guitar parts. It was just really fresh and different. It was like '80s riff rock or something like. Very, as a guitar player, I said, wow, this is something different. This is a different approach to playing. And then flash forward like 37 years or something, Mike, the singer, I met again in Mississauga at a charity event, and he had asked ahead of time if the Spoons could learn a couple of his songs because he wasn't bringing the band. He was just going to come up as a guest, and he would jump up on. He said, sure. So he learned like 5 of his songs, his hits, and he kept looking over, and I think he was surprised at how easily I slipped into the role, because it's not really that much different than the Spoons guitar parts, really. Yeah, and the sounds, we use the same JC120 amp and the same kind of chorus and echo and stuff. Anyways, I didn't hear from him again for about a year. And I was sitting in a patio in Italy, of all places, with my fiance at the time. I'm married now. Having nice pizza and a bottle of wine. I get this little text and everything. My score, it says, oh, wow, I forgot about him. And it says, do you want to join the band? I said, what? And I was like, well, what, for a gig or forever or what? Oh, let's see where it goes. And that was the beginning of that.
Nice. Well, you wouldn't want to be in Italy right now, so thank God it was
earlier.
No,
it's horrible. And we actually got married there last year, and we already have plans to go back in October. So they're taking away one of my favorite places in the world right now. But, so much going around the world. It's home, especially for me.
You want to talk about videos, too. And
oh, geez.
Yes,
yeah, crazy.
Speak to that.
With Man Traffic, we were on the very first episode of Much Music. And all these years later, when we did an album, I had no intentions of doing a video because I didn't think videos mattered anymore. Who really watches videos? But then people were saying, you know what, just do it for your fans, put them on YouTube, and they can watch them there. There's no more Much Music to put them on. And I thought, oh, well, okay. And then I thought, well, if we're going to do a video, it's got to be different. It can't just be us standing there playing our guitars and, whatever. So I met this guy who, his name's Peter Sacco, and he actually has one of these ghost hunter shows, where they go into a house with night vision goggles. And he said, you know what, it would be kind of cool if you did a video which looked like an episode of that, or that was the premise of the thing. I said, yeah, at least it's different, Anyways, what happens is this video, he's a filmmaker, he submits it, and in the meantime, it's been accepted and won like over 30 film festivals around the world in some cases as a video, but other cases as a short film, because it's so, complex. And so, from Bollywood to Hollywood, it was in Cannes in France, which was crazy. It was in TIFF, in Vienna, Berlin, and the cool thing is it's part of a trilogy. And the second one came out at the end of last year. The first one was called The First and Last Time. The second song is All the Wrong Things in the Right Places. And the third, which will be out soon, Beautiful Trap. And they're all part of the same story. So each one ends with To Be Continued. And that was kind of another hook that we built into the whole project.
That's awesome. You know what? It's just awesome that it's 40 years later, this is still happening. And you and I were talking before we started this about how it's even bigger than ever right now, the 80s, for all these bands.
Yeah, I never in a million years suspect that would happen. How lucky am I?
So I'm going to ask you.
The 80s were a good decade to be part of.
I'm going to ask you this question, though, about because you're a great songwriter, and I know it's not going to be easy, but if you had to pick, and I'll give you two maybe, of the best songs you feel that you've written over 40 years, would you be able to pick two of them?
There's probably a difference between best songs and my favorites. For some of the best songs written are some of the simplest and really have nothing to them.
Okay.
Like I would never get tired of Nova Heart. There's something weird about it that just doesn't get
It's
tired.
that clapping at the beginning, the drum machine.
Yeah, but even without that, I've done it acoustically. I've done it with a piano player. I did it somewhere for a thing. A guy came out with a banjo and did the solo on banjo. It's like whatever. And I've heard other people do it, and we've done it with an orchestra, But it has a weird quirkiness about it that's not normal, that just sticks with you. So I'll always like that. Arias Symphonies is kind of just for songwriting, it's like an opera, that thing.
Absolutely. One of my favorite. You've hit on two of my favorite songs, and I guess I'm partial to Romantic Traffic because I think when I started following the Spoons, that was the first thing that popped in my mind when anybody said the Spoons. So. You got a website. You got a website too, spoonsmusic.com, so people can check out your music, photos, videos, all that there. And
Facebook is the Spoons Music, the Spoons, and Twitter, obviously. It's under my name. You wouldn't believe everything related to Spoons has been taken. No, not Twitter. I mean Instagram. That seems to be the big forum now, but people are smart. Everything from the official Spoons, the Spoons band, Spoons music, it's all been taken by somebody, hoping you'll want it.
Yeah.
So if you go to Gord, you'll find it. You'll find it. So.
Perfect. And so I'm hoping to see you. People don't know much about this yet, but July the 5th here in Welland, and that'll be announced coming up hopefully in the next month or so. Hopefully you'll be around and not traveling the world. But the way the world is looking right now, it doesn't look like you're going too far, but you never know. No. Hopefully it gets better out there.
Yeah.
As always,
hope it all comes together. That'd be great.
As always, thank you for your time, my friend.
Thank you.